Please allow me to introduce our guest today. Our guest is Garin Hess, and Garin is the author of Sell Hard and Buying is Hard. So Garin, thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And just a slight correction, it's selling
is hard. Yeah.
Harder. Buying's harder than selling is the point. Yeah. So
yeah, of
anyway,
course.
Just to make sure we're off on the right foot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, first of all, hello to everybody, and I appreciate you taking your time to hear about the subject. I'm a serial software entrepreneur with my entire career in enterprise software. I began as an instructional writer for software, and that eventually led to e-learning development. And in one way or another, I've been involved in B2B sales in one role or another for over 20 years, including salesperson, head of sales, sales engineer, and of course, a CEO. So just on the personal side, I'm number 7 of 9 children, came from a large family. And my parents, my dad was a family physician. He would actually carry his little black bag around when I was little, do house calls, amazingly. And they really prized education. And when I was 14, they introduced me to my first computer, which was in 1984, which was the K-Pro. And some of you may remember that. It was right around the time that first IBM PC was coming online. And I was really smitten with this desire to use computers to make things easier. I just thought it was amazing that computers could help make things easier and better for everybody. And it's a kind of also on a personal note, just to see where kind of all these threads come together. I grew up in a devoutly religious home in Utah as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And among other doctrines in our religion is just this belief in continuous improvement, continuous progress, sort of both in this life and after this life. And so there's kind of this visceral desire to improve whatever domain I'm in, and that's, I guess, what has led a lot to the underlying current of why I'm really interested in creating software and writing books.
I have to say, I really got a lot of this book because I have a new venture that's coming online, I hope, after Labor Day, called Funding Organizer. And as I was reading your book, I came up with a lot of great ideas about how to position my product and the process of actually selling it to bankers and financial institutions. I end up making a lot of notes for myself for my product. So tell us about why you wrote the book.
Well, really, it's all about, because B2B buying is too hard. If you think about how Amazon has revolutionized the way that we do retail purchasing or consumer purchasing, we didn't know that it could be that easy before Amazon invented how easy it could be. And unfortunately for most traditional retailers, they still haven't, even as they get online and try to make their wares and goods available online, they haven't made it as easy as Amazon. And so Amazon continues to dominate. And I would say above all other things that Amazon has done to be the dominant retailer in the world, it's the fact that they've made it so easy to buy. And so I use that as a corollary for trying to solve the problem of B2B buying. It's just too difficult. There are so many different stakeholders involved, and the process is just extremely complex and painful. And just having been a B2B buyer myself and also being involved in B2B sales, it's just something I'm really passionate about trying to make easier. And I believe that the companies that make buying easier are the ones that are going to win.
That seems obvious, right? So what is buyer enablement? You talk about that in the book.
Yeah, so I guess, in 3 words, it's just that making buying easier, right? So in a nutshell, it's facilitating the different stakeholders that have to make a purchase decision. And specifically, it's equipping your champion who has to go on the front lines and sell whatever your product or solution is. It's equipping that champion so that they can sell internally for you. I mean, if you think about it, that champion that's so interested in your product or solution, they have to go engage 5 to 10, sometimes more stakeholders to make a decision. And they're not trained sales reps from your organization. Yeah, after a 1-hour phone call, a lot of times they go around and try to drive interest inside the organization. And so buyer enablement is really about equipping those champions to do a better job of that. And kind of another way to look at it is if you enable the buyers to do what they need to do, you're going to get more purchases more often. And another kind of perspective is it's imagine leading a friend of yours on a dangerous adventure that you've been on before, right? That's really what buyer enablement's about. Your buyer's embarking on a very risky adventure, which is the purchasing decision of bringing some new technology, some new solution into their organization. And there are all kinds of risks associated with that. As a salesperson, you've been through this buying process so many times. You're like that. You need to be that trusted guide that's going to guide them through that process, help them avoid all the pitfalls, and come out successful on the other end.
Yeah, you got to make the client look good. You re-emphasize that throughout the book. What's the biggest mistakes organizations make when trying to shorten the sales cycle?
Well, one of the interesting things about the sales cycle is that most vendors think that it's shorter than it is. You quite often hear sales cycles of 4 to 6 months. Now, it varies obviously from organization to organization, but that's quite common. And there's recent research shows that IT purchases, for example, buyers actually spend 16.3 months making a purchase decision. And in comparison, so this is Gartner that did this research. In comparison, the vendors think that the sales process the purchasing process only took 4 to 5 months. So that's the first mistake you make when you're trying to shorten the sales cycle, is you're only focusing on what you think is the sales cycle and not the whole buyer journey. And so you really have to think about where does the buyer start and what are they doing before they normally get engaged with you as a sales team. And then I think there are two other kinds of issues. One is we focus on sales processes when we're trying to shorten sales cycles, and that's okay because that's what we can control, right? But what we really need to do is focus. When we do focus on our processes in sales, we need to focus on what do the buyers have to get done to make a purchase decision, and what roles are involved in that purchase decision. Because if you can help them do that faster, you'll shorten the sales cycle. So it's really kind of misplacing the attention on and putting it on sales rather than on the buyers that I think is the biggest misfire when it comes to shortening the sales cycle.
So you used a process that cut the sales process by 60%. What's the best process for cutting the sales cycle down?
So there are a variety of things that you could try to do, but I just want to mention maybe 2 things. Research suggests that objections are one of the things that lengthens that sales cycle. And we all know this from experience, right? If we've been in sales, so you think you're going to get a close and then some objections come up either from your primary stakeholders or just some extra stakeholders that come in late in the game. And these objections on average take 2.6 months to overcome. That's a long time. That's a good 10 to 12 weeks that it's going to take to overcome the objections. And the other problem that causes sales cycles to really stretch out is just the multiple stakeholders. You engage one, and then you've got to engage another, and then another, and another. I mean, in 2013, the average number of stakeholders involved in a B2B purchase was 5.4. By 2016, just 3 years later, it was 6.2. And then the most recent research suggests 6.8. And if you look at just traditional IT purchases, there's even some research that says it's 13 to 14 stakeholders. So if you think that you're engaging 1 or 2 at the beginning, and then you've got to bring in two or three more, and it goes on and on. So these are the 2 main problems or obstacles to a short sales cycle is all the stakeholders and knowing who they are and engaging them, and then objections. So just in short, the way that you try to shorten the sales cycle is first discover and engage the stakeholders sooner and educate them sooner, and then preemptively overcome or deal with the objections. Objections are kind of like landmines, right? You know that they're there. You've been through this process so many times that you know what all the objections are. Well, why wait until your champion steps on one of these landmines? Instead, just educate and coach the champion on what the objections are. And you don't even have to call them objections, right? They're only objections because they come up later and they haven't thought of them before. So if you preemptively, I liken it to a preemptive strike, right? Instead of, if your objections are the enemy, well, let's take out the enemy by just bringing them up early and saying, hey, as a buyer, you're going to have to think about this and this and this. And some of the people in your organization are going to raise these concerns. These are some of the ways that you handle it. So as long as you do go through that process of discovering and engaging those stakeholders earlier and preemptively overcome or address, even, you're not really having to overcome them because the buyer isn't even aware of them. You're educating them on those objections early. You're going to save weeks and weeks, sometimes months off of your sales cycle.
I actually followed a lot of what that you've written in your book. With my new venture, I actually got the buyers involved in helping us develop the process.
Nice.
And show them in advance, here's what we're doing. I need your input. And we already have 5 folks who want to buy in already because they were intimately involved.
It's a great validation process.
Yeah. And you mentioned your book of making sure that you are in the buyer's shoes and thinking about what that is. And also you talk about, which I've experienced. I had a venture that was about reverse factoring, and we would be giving folks, large sums of money, 250 million to $1 billion. We would start with the CEO, and he liked it at the 50,000 foot level, but then your pitch was different as he made you work your way backwards in the organization for the people who would ultimately be responsible. And you're right, it turned out to be between 10 and 15 people that we had to convince and give a lot of detail. Yeah. And your book also made me think about, we've developed questions that we think that they're going to ask us and start plotting that out. So I think it's all very smart. How do you solve the demo bottleneck? Talk about that.
Yeah, out of all of the things that cause a slowdown in the sales process in general, it's just the education is the most time-intensive part of the buyer's tasks. They have to learn about your solution. They may have to learn about other vendor solutions. They have to learn, first of all, about the problem they're trying to solve and how they should solve it in general. And there's all kinds of education that goes on. And when it comes to IT purchases, and in particular, I specialize in software, SaaS, and there's this propensity to do demo after demo after demo, because you demo first to the champion, then the champion says, hey, I'm going to bring in my boss, and the boss comes in, and you got a demo for them, and then the boss says, hey, why don't we bring in a couple of other colleagues in this other department, and let's bring in some potential users. And over time, you end up demoing 4 or 5, sometimes as many as 10 or 12 times, I've heard our customers say. So this can be a huge bottleneck, stretching out the sales cycle. And again, it goes back to those stakeholders, right? So imagine if you could get all those stakeholders watching the same demo right at the beginning. You get all of them involved. Or if you could put in the hands of your stakeholders a demo that they could share with everybody and do that on their own time, rather than having to set up these appointments that it really make it difficult to coordinate all these calendars. And so the way that we handle that is through interactive demo automation, which is just software that automatically personalizes a video demo of a software system, for example, to each stakeholder that joins that demo. And they can do it on their own time. And so what you do is you engage that initial stakeholder, the champion, with an interactive video demo. As they watch it, they're encouraged to share it. They share it with other stakeholders. You not only discover them, but you're educating them on your product and solution in the process. And this can all happen so much faster than it does traditionally. It's not uncommon for us, as we use this model, to engage several stakeholders in the first call. Just as a simple example, a lot of companies have sales specialization roles. So you've got a business development representative setting up appointments for the account executive. Well, if the BDR, if they set up an appointment and they say, hey, Mr. Prospect, would you like to talk to sales? They say yes. Okay, how about next Friday? And let's say that that's a week from now, or even 4 days from now. Well, there's this gap between the time you set an appointment and the time the appointment's held. Well, what are you doing in that gap to educate the customer. And you can look at the sales cycle in one lens as just gaps. You have appointment and a gap, another appointment and a gap, and more appointments and more gaps. Well, one of the big questions is, how do you sell in the gaps? How do you engage them when you're not actually there? Research from Gartner talks about how the buyers are spending about 17%, only 17% of their buying process time with vendors. And that means if they're looking at 2 or 3 vendors, competing vendors, they may only spend 5% of their total time with you as a vendor. That means there's 85% of the time that they're spending doing something else. And so the question is, how do you engage them during that other time? And that's where that interactive video demo and the demo automation comes into play. And so just as to be clear, we're not suggesting you automate all demos, because you really need to have some of those deep dive personal conversations and demos, but there's so much more you can automate, and it helps bring that buying group to the conversation better educated and ready to talk specifics.
And shorten the cycle for sure.
That's right, it compresses everything.
Yeah. So in COVID-19, it's a new world, and lots of presenting sales. The incumbents have more to win and continue to. Here's the question: the incumbents have more to win and continue versus new suppliers. So if you're an incumbent, if you're a new product like you might be bringing in, how do you overcome the incumbent in a situation like we're in right now with the pandemic?
Well, I think that, overcoming an incumbent, I don't know that it really changes a lot just because of the pandemic. What has changed because of the pandemic is simply that everyone is forced to do everything remotely, digitally, in some fashion or another. I think when it comes to overcoming an incumbent, you have to do a couple of things. You have to show really strong differentiation, show a big enough value that it is worth their effort to make the change, and you need to help underscore the pain that they're going through. So one of the VPs of sales that I've worked with, currently working with, Rex Galbraith, calls it dragging them through the glass, which is kind of a horrible visual, but the idea is that you've got to help the prospects feel the pain of their current situation. There's the old adage that the devil that you know is better than the devil you don't. And I think that's just inherent in human nature, that we resist change because we've become comfortable with the pain, and sometimes we become so comfortable with it that even though it's painful, we don't really remember that it's there as much as it is. And so to unseat an incumbent, you really have to help point out the pain and exacerbate the pain in a lot of ways, helping them really feel it, so that they'll have the desire and motivation to make the change, because change alone as one person is difficult. Try to get a whole organization to change can seem almost impossible.
Yeah, that's the aircraft carrier in the bathtub problem, trying to move those, right? In the book, you talk about salespeople sometimes get self-centered. How do you guard against it? When does that happen?
Well, I think, this is at the core of all sales problems, is self-centeredness. As in general, we're so focused on hitting our number. We're focused on getting the deal. In the back of our minds, we're thinking about what we're going to do if we do hit quota and get that accelerator commission or whatever it might be. And the reality is that does not do us a service. We're less likely to be effective when we think about our own needs, and much more likely when we're really immerse ourselves in the buyer's needs. And so this question you ask is I think one of the most fundamental questions about human nature, really, not just in sales, but how do we become less self-centered in general, which is, I think, at the crux of a lot of religion, for example. But I think in terms of sales, for me, and this is constantly something I have to try to guard against myself, It is trying to ground myself before a call, taking even 30 seconds and just trying to remind myself, this is not about me, this is about them. I'm trying to enter their world. I'm not trying to get them to enter my world. Um, and I think if you can imagine yourself in their shoes, just like anybody that's trying to get out of their own skin and really empathize with someone else, imagine what it's like to be that buyer or that stakeholder and what challenges they have. If you think about their life, you're the least important person in their life, right? At the core of the things that are important to them are things like their friends, their family, their maybe some of their deeply held political or religious beliefs, and then they have their work, and then they have their career and advancement promotions and career paths and things like that. And all of these things that they are thinking about, problems with their children or family members or other people. And eventually you sort of are in this really far orbit, you might say, in their world, kind of like Pluto in the solar system. And a lot of times as sellers, we think, oh, we're right in there. And of course, we do want to build that relationship and get closer and closer and become more and more relevant. But the reality is the only way we're going to do that effectively is by really trying to immerse ourselves in what their problems are. And so I think, going back to the original question of how do we guard against self-centeredness, I think it's just a daily practice, and it has to become a habit. Until it becomes a habit, I think right before the call, we've got to remind ourselves, I want to make a human connection. This is not a prospect. This is not a potential customer. This is a fellow human being that I want to make a connection with, and I'm going to try to help them. And the way I help them is to try to get inside their world and understand their problems. So those are my thoughts. I think there are probably other ways to do it too, but.
Yeah, I liked what you also wrote in the book. You said, and I want to ask you, what's the difference between listening and replying?
Yes, so I think this came from a TED talk. I think her name was Celeste Headley.
Yes.
Yeah, and so she made this comment that we're too often listening to reply, and rather than really to understand. And so I think it's a really interesting question to ponder. And the way that I think about it is listening to reply is we're thinking about what can I say that will advance my agenda? What can I say that will make me look good, or at least make me not look bad, or something like that? Whereas listening to understand, you're not thinking about the reply until you have fully understood. Then you formulate a reply. So often in sales, we hear something, and in fact, this comes up with objections and questions about features and things. Someone will say, oh, do you have this feature? Are you GDPR compliant? Do you integrate with Salesforce? Whatever. And as they are starting to say that, immediately you're thinking, yeah, we do. I'm going to do this. I'm going to tell them that, and and I'm just going to tell them that's what we've got. And we're just ready to reply because we're ready to show them what we can do. And in reality, we need to understand why. Do we even know why they're asking that question? And what is bringing that up? What's the driving motivations behind the question? And so it's quite common for us, just again, human nature, to just want to jump in with a response before we understand. And I think we just have to try to postpone the reply, realizing that if we truly understand, the response will come, an effective response will come, rather than worrying that maybe we aren't going to have the right response or something.
Yeah, I thought that was very smart to actually ask them why they need this particular thing. And so you can understand, because then that might even lead you to other benefits that your product provides that you never thought about asking about.
If I could share kind of an interesting anecdote, and I hope people don't mind, because it does kind of taken from my religious background, but it applies here. So I was a missionary for our church in Argentina in my young adult life, from age 19 to 21. Just lived down there, and among some of the poorest classes of people, and we're trying to teach them about religious principles and things, and trying to help them change their lives, help people out of addictions and other self-harming behaviors, and things, help strengthen their families. And I remember one of the main things that we would try to do, and that we were trained to do, was it was just called ask additional questions. And it was when somebody has a concern, like you say, hey, or, can you give up smoking, or whatever other kind of problem that they might be struggling with that you're trying to help them with, at first they're going to object. And a lot of times our reaction is just to have a knee-jerk response and assume this or that about why they're rejecting. And I just want to share one experience. There was a woman that we were working with, and she was severely handicapped. She couldn't walk hardly at all. It was very difficult for her to walk. And she wanted to give up an addictive behavior. And we asked her about this. Why can't, or she wanted to give it up. She said she was going to, and then later in another conversation, she said, I'm not going to give this up. And we were kind of surprised because she had seemed pretty convinced before. And we said, well, why not? And she gave this excuse or that excuse. And I kept feeling like there's got to be something else behind all this. And through additional questions, she finally broke down and started crying. She said, because this addiction, and it was a type of drug, she said, this is the only friend I have in the world. And I thought, wow, now that is the real reason, right?
Right, yeah.
If we had been,
and found it.
Yeah, you drill down enough. And so even though that's in a totally different context from business, it's an example of trying to understand and asking those additional questions until you actually understand. Because then once we understood the real problem, then we could propose potential solutions. And I think it's the same when we're selling a product or anything like that. You've got to ask those additional questions to truly understand before you can make good recommendations.
What do you mean? What do you mean when you're writing your book? There's no such thing as a complex sale.
I love this one because when I say that to experienced salespeople, you see the hair on the back of their neck rise up, and they start rolling up their sleeves to get into a so-called type of fist fight, you might say.
Yeah.
And I say this in a provoking way, in a sense, because I want to dislodge people's thinking. So the way I think about this is there's no such thing as a complex sale, only complex purchases. And this goes to this point that I make in the book, that you cannot close deals. A salesperson cannot close deals. When was the last time as a salesperson you signed the contract for the customer? And I suppose if you went over and held it under their head and like, sign this contract, maybe you could say, I closed the deal.
Gave me an offer I couldn't refuse.
But the reality is they're the ones who have to sign the contract. They're the only ones who can close the deals. So in reality, no salesperson can be a closer, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't tactics or skills that are good at helping people make decisions and get to that final decision. But in the end, it's the buyer's decision. And by saying there's no such thing as a complex sale, but instead there are complex purchases, it just changes our focus from what we do as sellers to what the buyer's doing. And it's all about this complex and convoluted and incredibly painful buying process that the buyers have to go through. And so I like to say, instead of, hey, we won the sale, we won the purchase, right? We won their decision to make the purchase. And it just helps keep the focus on that. And I would say, in a sense, there is no such thing as a sale. There are only purchases. So it's really just about where we put our focus.
What you're going to is that there's these 6 to 16 people that are involved, which is what makes the real complexity of it. And you had this story in the book about this guy who thought he had the sale, and then his boss. Tell that story a little bit.
Oh, which one are you referring to? Because
this is the story where the guy tells his boss, "Oh yeah, I got the sale."
Yeah. So this actually comes from Ben Horowitz's book, "The Hard Thing About Hard Things," which is a fantastic book, by the way. And I think, if I remember right, there's a VP of sales named Marc Kramer. Marc Kramer, I can't remember his last name. Anyway, so yeah, they're in this deal review meeting, and it's a great little bit there. And I recommend it. We just put a little snippet in our book, but I recommend getting the entire book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. But they're in this deal review meeting, and Mark says to one of the salespeople, "Tell me about this deal. Where's it at?" And the salesperson says, oh yeah, this is, 90% sure going to come in because we've got the main champion and he says his boss likes it, and they've seen our pricing proposal, and I don't know all the things, but he mentions all these different things. And then the VP of sales, Mark, says, well, do you have the head of IT? Has he come in on this? And the salesperson says, well, no. And he says, well, you better take this off your forecast because this deal is not going to come in. You got to go get this head of IT to get in. And so the salesperson kind of backtracked and went and did that and was able to close the deal. But it was because that VP of sales understood the different personas that have to get involved to make a purchase. He understood the buying experience more than the salesperson and more than the champion. So often we hear our champion inside the organization say, oh yeah, this is good, everything is good, it's great. And then we're blindsided by another stakeholder. In fact, I'll share another experience. Earlier in this company, in 2015, we were raising our Series A round, and we had a term sheet that we had signed with a venture company, a venture firm, for I think it was $8 million. A great valuation. We were excited. We had the no shop clause going, so we had turned down all these other conversations. We were into red lines, and I had asked them, hey, we got this through the investment committee, yes, blah, blah, blah. So we're into red lines literally 3 days before we're supposed to sign. I'm in a hotel in Las Vegas getting ready to go out on a trade show conference floor and do a presentation to hundreds of people about our company. And I get a text message, hey, we need to talk. So I run up to my hotel room and I get on the phone, and my main contact there, one of the managing partners, says, we're not going to do the deal. And I mean, this was literally 3 days before we got signature on this. We were down to a little knitting through the red lines. And I just said, what are you talking about? And he said, we just don't like this or that. And I said, we already went through that weeks ago, so what's going on? And he says, okay. After some additional questions, he says, well, there was a LP, a limited partner, that hadn't seen the deal yet, and he doesn't like it. And I said, what are you talking, I don't understand. You said it got through the investment committee. And he said, well, it did, but he wasn't available for all this time, which was, I think it was 60 days we were going through this. And he just came back online because he was off, I don't know, trekking in the wilderness or something. And he came back and got his eyes on it last week, and he doesn't want to do it, and we're not going to do it. And I said, why does he have such a big sway? And they said, because he's one of the limited partners, but he represents half of our total fund. And I was like, oh my gosh. So talk about being blindsided by an extra stakeholder. And there's nothing, speaking of motivation for writing this book and these kinds of principles, there's nothing more painful than really feeling like you know what's going on, that you have the landscape figured out and everything's in place, and then having the carpet just yanked out from under you. And ultimately, that's what we really want to improve in with buyer enablement, is not only shortening the sales cycle, but increasing the predictability. And I, having been not having been through the fundraising process enough times, I got blindsided, and that's just a perfect example of how a hidden stakeholder can come in and deep six your deal. And you can really help avoid that in your normal sales, because if you take collectively as a sales team, you know all the steps and all the stakeholder personas that have to get involved to get a deal done. Just like this Marc Kramer in Ben Horowitz's book, he knew what personas had to get involved, and he was able to coach his salesperson through that. And really the salesperson has to coach their buyer through that, because the buyer doesn't understand that ultimately.
I had the same thing. I'm actually had dinner.
Really?
Well, yeah, I had dinner with a guy like 2 days before, and then the guy who was overseeing the deal, his father died of a heart attack. Oh, wow. And he ended up leaving the firm, and they said you had to start all over again. Yeah. I said, but we just had the dinner.
You're right there.
Pre-closed dinner. How's that possible? And I never factored that in. I never asked, is everybody involved.
As everybody in.
If you get hit by a bus, what happens to us?
Right.
So I learned that
Exactly.
for future people. Please explain the 5 Ps and their importance.
So I mentioned a list of 5 motivators for buyers, personal motivators that are, I'll start with the word letter P. And it's in this context of what I call emotional ROI. So everybody buys on emotion. Doesn't matter what they tell you, they always buy on emotion. Now, they're going to need rational reasons, but everybody's buying for some emotional reason internally. And so these 5 Ps are basically profit, prestige, pleasure, preservation, and pain relief. So for example, in profit, it could be simply something like, well, if I get this solution in and it's going to help me hit my target and then I'll make more money or something like that, right? It's just how do I make money? And that's and you might say, well, that's not emotional. Well, the reality is, what are they going to do with that money? I'm going to buy a bigger house. I'm going to buy a new car. I'm going to go on vacation. Or they're going to do something with that money that increases their emotion. And that's, or I'm just going to feel more secure because I've got more money. So profit's still an emotional reason for buying. Prestige, of course, is so when everybody applauds my promotion at work, or when I get that next recognition, then I know I've achieved some milestone that I've always wanted. Pleasure could just be, I hate using the CRM. This software is so difficult, and this new software is going to be so much easier. It's going to make my life easier. When we're talking about preservation, it's really about trying to keep their job. So they might be engaging with you or your solution just because they want to protect and build a bulwark around their job. I've seen this in large companies that we've worked with, where the person wanting to bring in our software, so our company's name is Consensus, and they want to bring in the Consensus interactive demo automation software as a reason to help, 1, increase their prestige, and 2, create something, bring something to the table so useful that it protects their job in an otherwise maybe difficult environment, especially now with the pandemic and things where a lot of jobs are being lost, hopefully mostly temporarily. But and then the last one is really about pain relief, which is just a common challenge, and they just want to have a more, it kind of is the flip side of the pleasure motivator, which is just how can I stop having such a difficult or stressful time at my job. Like maybe it's software, project management software, for example, and managing projects with the current software is so difficult, and it helps make it easier, for example. So those are the 5 Ps that I bring up there.
Sorry, I'm putting it on mute as my English bulldog, as you can hear her barking in the background that she sees.
No problem.
Somebody. What is emotional ROI and its importance?
So most of us, when we think of ROI, we strictly think financials. And I would argue that while that is extremely important, in fact, research suggests it's one of the top 3 things that buyers want from vendors. They want demos, they want social proof, and they want ROI help. So financial ROI is super helpful, but it is by far from the only type of ROI. What's really going on, and very much more difficult to quantify, in fact, I'd say it's almost impossible to quantify, although there are ways you can help with this, is the emotional ROI. And what that means is, if you look at financial ROI, it's, if I put in $100, can I get more than $100 of benefit back? So if you look at the same thing on the emotional side, how much emotion and energy am I going to have to put into bringing this product or solution into my company? And in exchange, what kind of emotional benefit do I get back out of it, right? So if you just look at that as a simple equation, if it is going to cost them more emotionally than the emotional benefit they're going to get out of it, you're not going to get the deal. If the emotional benefit they get is a lot higher than what they have to put into it, because they're going to have to expend and take risks to help change their own organization, If the emotional benefit is potentially higher than what they're going to have to put in, then you have a better chance. And I think it's an area that is often overlooked. We focus so much on the financial ROI as if that's the real motivator. And even though that's a critical component, the deeply emotional part of it is really about this emotional question, and it goes on inside our buyers' minds all the time. They're constantly asking themselves things like, I wonder how hard this is going to be to implement. Is the user interface easy or difficult to use? I wonder if I can get my boss to buy in on this. I wonder if my staff will use this, or if they're going to hate me for bringing this to the team. And how much energy am I going to have to put into it? And they really take some real risks. As an example, first of all, there's just the risk that change in general is going to be hard. So you're going to upset the fruit basket. They've got their predictability and stability. Again, going back to the devil you know is easier than better than the devil you don't. Most people don't want to change, so they're just taking the risk that they're going to make a change and life's going to be worse. Another risk that they take is just peer reputation. If I bring this in to the organization, how's it going to make me look? Now, a lot of times it's going to hopefully make them look good, but it's also a risk. And then just workload and stress. For example, you have everybody's super busy, and you're talking to them and asking them to add something to their plate. And if let's say they're already working 60-hour weeks, can they actually put in another 5 hours a week to help bring your product into the organization? They're weighing those kinds of things. And then last, just sort of work-life balance. If I've got struggles at home, or if I just feel like I need to spend more time with my kids or something like that, and you're asking me right now to bring, no matter if everything else is great, the financial ROI is good, it's going to solve my problems, I might delay just because I don't think it's going to disrupt my work-life balance in such a way that it's not worth the emotional risk. So these are all just areas where, as salespeople, we're usually not privy to what all is going on in there. But it's important to remember that it's a factor. And I'll give you just one way to help solve for an example of this. So one of them is implementation. Everybody knows the concept of shelfware. You buy software and it just doesn't get implemented. And that's because there's so much energy in the vision of what it can do, but the price of the emotional price and energy, both personally and for the organization, just feels too great for whatever reason to get the software working and providing the value. So one of the ways that you can help overcome that in the sales process or the buying process is help quantify how much time and energy it will take different roles in the company to implement. So provide implementation guides. So at Consensus, for example, we have a step-by-step implementation guide on how to implement intelligent demo automation. And it basically says, here's what you're going to need to do during the purchasing process, and here's how long we think it will take you. Here are the steps you'll have to take in the first week after you purchase, and these are the different roles you need to get involved, and this is how long we estimate it will take. And that you can actually say it'll take you 5 to 7 hours in the first week. Then it'll take you 3 to 5 hours in the second week. Then it will take you, and that way, it takes what was a nebulous, difficult, large task of implementation in the buyer's mind and puts form and factor around it and helps them make a decision. Oh, I do think I can implement this, rather than feeling like just some big bunch of tasks that I'm not sure I can fit in. So that's just one example of where you can increase the emotional ROI by helping them see, oh, I only have to put in 5 hours. Wow, this is going to give me huge value and in so many emotional ways. So I'm willing to put in that 5 hours. If you don't define that for them, they are likely to just feel this great, again, undefined fear of that risk of implementation.
I think you're afraid to tell them about the 5 hours. Like you're afraid they'll say, oh shit, it's 5 hours, forget it. Because everybody's hoping sooner. I had a client of mine that I worked with that sold a new system, dislodged the other company. And they were wondering why after a year, the company didn't renew. And I contacted all these folks who didn't renew. It turned out they never taught them how to use the product.
Yeah.
Spent all the time selling it in. And then the old company mirrored essentially what they were doing, and they were already there. So they just kept it going. So, it was foolish on their part not to do that. I like
Well,
it.
and if
Yeah.
I could just touch on that, I mean, that's the reason we need to bring it up. It's the reason to bring up objections. It's the reason to bring up how much it's going to take to implement, because otherwise it's just bad revenue. If they're not going to renew, you shouldn't bring them on in the first place, right? If at all possible, because it's just bad for them. It's bad for you, and so the reality is we've got to help them see exactly what it takes to implement, even though it may shock them, but what we're really doing is selling for the renewal rather than selling just for the initial deal.
Yeah, no question. I thought this was interesting. You mentioned providing a special experience during the buying process. Please give us the ingredients and some examples. So I know back in the 60s and 70s, I knew what that special experience was. 3 martini lunch and going to a strip club. But today, what's the special experience in today's day and age?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there are lots of different ways to make the buying experience special. But I'll tell you some key things that I think are essential no matter what you choose to do. One of them is simply responsiveness. Buyers want to know that they need to know that you're responsive, and it builds trust to be responsive. As a simple example, in our industry, so we sell our software primarily into sales engineering organizations that build the interactive video demos, and then they provide those libraries of demos for the sales to send out and track the engagement and things like that. And then the challenge is, all of a sudden I lost my train of thought here. Remind me of the question.
My question was about the special experience.
Oh, right. Okay, special experience. Thank you. I don't know what happened there.
Yeah.
So here's the way to look at a special experience is to look at the non-special experience. So the reality in the pre-sales industry, according to surveys that we've done, is that when buyers want a demo, it takes, on average, 2 weeks before they get a demo. I think it was 2 weeks is the number. The point is that it takes way too long. That's not a great experience if you want a demo and it takes that long to get one. So one of the ways to help provide in today's world is through digital tools like what we do, where you can provide a demo instantly. You want a demo? We'll send you a link. You can watch it right now. You don't have to get an appointment. You don't have to do anything. You can go through and answer certain questions, and then the software pulls different video clips and documents together for you just to give you exactly what you need. So I think one of the things that buyers want today in today's digital environment is they want to be educated immediately. We're way past this. Let's wait 2 weeks. And this is one of the challenges that a lot of sales organizations have. They have this belief that demoing early is bad. And I think the reason they have that is because the demos that they give are not good for those early stages. So if you bring in a sales engineer after the first conversation and you have a 70-minute demo, yeah, that is bad. The buyers aren't ready for that. What the buyers are ready for, what we call vision or what we call micro demos. Buyers want as early as possible. It's one of the top things they want, is they want to see how the product and solution works and how it benefits them. But they only want to see it for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, right? And so it's not about not demoing early. It's about doing the right thing at the right time. And so what's funny is right now, a lot of organizations say, oh, we're not going to demo until we've done this and this and this, and then we'll finally let you see a demo. Well, that's not a great experience. A special experience is giving the buyer exactly what they need at the stage that they're at. And it helps them in those early stages. They're just trying to qualify or disqualify you as a vendor. And it helps them catch the vision, it helps them understand how the product might work a little bit, and it helps them decide whether they want to take that next step. And so I think the special experience is really just about educating them and being that guide through the buying process. And that's what buyer enablement ultimately is about, is you make it easier to buy by being the guide. You tell them, hey, here's what you need to learn what you need at this stage. And you know what? At the next stage, here's what you're going to need, and you should be aware of this because here's some potential pitfalls. Oh, and by the way, these are these stakeholders that you need to get involved. Let's talk about those. That's a special experience. I mean, you might think of it as having one of these guides on a tour or something like that that is going to help you go step by step and have success. That's, I think, today's special experiences. We've got to change the mindset as salespeople from I'm selling to I'm the buying coach.
Well, and I wanted to know why you said it's a bad idea to have a demo too early.
Well, I would argue that it's not a bad idea, but a lot of organizations do think it's a bad idea.
Okay.
Just because it is, if you do what's called a traditional demo too early, then it's like drinking from a fire hose, and that's not great.
Too much.
Yeah, it's too much too early, and so again, to be effective at buyer enablement, you have to understand at the early stages what they really want. And we have a webinar, for example, on what we call the 6 demo types, and how they correlate with the different stages of the buying process. In the early stages of the buying process, you want to give them a vision demo. Catch the vision of how your life could be better with our product or solution. And once you catch that vision, then let's give you an actual product demo, but we call it a micro demo. It's just short. It's a peek. That's all they want at that point, is they just want to see, how does this work? And then you take them through what we call a qualifying or standard demo. And then you might eventually get them into a deep dive technical demo. And then near the end of the buying process, we have what we call closing demos. These are things like where they're in the fear stage right before they're making a commitment, and they're trying to de-risk. And so they're asking all these questions like, well, do you integrate with this system? And how does customer support work? And do we, how does that implementation work? Do you have GDPR compliance and SOC 2 and things like that? Those are all, you can make interactive video demos about all of those and bring those up as you near that stage and say, hey, as you get closer to a buying decision, here are some things you should think about. So these are what we would call closing demos. So again, I would argue that it's not about not doing demos early, it's about what type of demo, right? So you just need to understand what types of demos that buyers need at that stage.
So one of the questions we have here is, how are you not overwhelming the customer with all the information that preemptively addresses the objections?
That's a really good question, and you do have to be sensitive. And I would say that the one of the biggest errors that salespeople make when they're trying to be helpful is just dumping information. In fact, most sales enablement tools are like that. The salesperson will just put a ton of information in this online portal and say, hey, here's all the information you ever needed to make a decision. And then the buyer's going there, they're just going, oh, what in the heck, what do I start? What do I read? Which of these case studies should I read? And what about this technical documentation? And I don't even know. And so the reality is, again, that as a buyer or as the buying coach, you need to understand what objections are going to come up when. So you're there to know what is going to happen before it happens, because you've been through the process before. And so if you often get late stage objections, you're probably not going to bring those up on the first call, right? But you could bring them up, instead of waiting for late stage, you could bring it up in the middle. And so the way that I typically do it when I'm engaging with a prospect is, at certain points in the initial conversation, I'll say, now, as you embark on this journey of making a decision whether you're going to bring into your organization intelligent demo automation, here are some things to think about. And I will bring up a couple of things that they should be thinking about at those early stages, and give them information about that. And they say, okay, that's interesting. Thanks for that. I'll keep that in mind. And it's just kind of priming them. Well, at the time that they are ready to go promote inside, now that could come right away, or it could come a few weeks after that initial conversation. But at some point, that champion is going to say, I'm going to go make a presentation to the executive team or to my peers or whoever the decision makers are. And at that point, that's when you really need to give them what they need to be effective. Because what's going to happen is they're going to go present, they're going to go be the salesperson, right? They're in charge of selling, really. You're in charge of buying, which is kind of a flipped scenario. They go sell inside the organization. You are in charge of guiding them through that buying process. So as they go to make that pitch, they're going to be hit up with all kinds of objections. So you need to equip them with, in a very simple way, you equip them with a list of, here are common questions you're going to get from your VP of sales. Here are common questions you're going to get from the CFO. And instead of calling them objections, right, it's just kind of common questions you get from different roles. So you don't necessarily want to throw that all of them at one time, but as you map out the buying group, and then as they go to prepare to pitch or educate their stakeholders, their other buyers, at that moment, that's when you need to provide them with that information. So it's a great question, and I don't know that there's a perfect answer, but you want to do it at that right moment when that objection or that concern is likely to come up, or before it comes up, but not way too early, right?
So here's the last question, because we're almost out of time here.
Yeah.
And you've been fabulous. Really enjoyed interviewing you.
Thanks, Mark.
Talk about discounts. Like at what point do you give people discounts? You talk about it in the book as, you have to think very strategically about how you utilize the concept of a discount.
Discounts, everybody, so from a buyer's perspective, buyers love a deal, right? In fact, my wife is the queen of wanting a deal. She loves a deal. My dad used to say, this may sound very sexist, so please forgive me, but my dad used to say, this will sound sexist, so hopefully it won't offend anybody, but this was just his perspective. He would say, women will spend women will spend half as much for something they don't want, and men will spend twice as much for something they want, and I think it was his description, because my mom, for example, one time bought a 50-pound bag of carrots because it was on sale. And we ate carrots for everything for like 2 months. Do we need 50 pounds of carrots? No, but it was on sale, right? So, we all love a deal. My wife especially loves a deal, and I love helping her find great deals and things like that, because she gets a rise off of it. Well, all of us want to feel like we got a deal. The most common, and this goes back to the emotion thing, the most common way that we help our buyers feel like they got a deal is to give them discounts. Well, it may not always be the right strategy, because you're lowering your price, and it also sets the expectation that you're going to give more discounts in the future on the renewal, on upgrades or add-ons. And so there are lots of different ways to try to handle that, and I'm not necessarily the world's expert on how to prevent discounting. However, I would just say the reason people want discounts are, one, they want a deal. Two, maybe you haven't helped prove the value enough. And three, you haven't given other creative options. So one way to think about creative options is buyers only have so many energy cycles on making a decision about price. And they will spend those energy cycles on either lowering the price or choosing between an array of options. So if you give them options that are all good prices for you, they're more likely to request fewer discounts, because they're spending their energy choosing the different options rather than all the energy on, hey, I want a discount here and a discount there. So providing them different options, and it could be, hey, well, if you want a cheaper price, give us a longer term. If you want, instead of a discount, how about we give you more users? How about we give you this extra add-on module, or provide some additional training, or whatever it might be, right? So there are lots of other strategies, I suppose, there, but I think it's important from a buyer enablement standpoint to realize you do need to help them feel like they're getting a deal of some kind and bake that into your process of creative options.
Garin, I felt like we got a good deal for the hour that you gave us.
Thanks, Mark.
And your book was terrific.
Oh, you're very kind.
And I really got a lot out of it that I'm using for my new venture. I even marked something that you talked about today, which was helping the client's reputation, because I'll be selling to financial institutions, and my product could help their reputation.
Yeah.
So, this coming Tuesday, I have Mitzi Purdue of the Purdue Chicken Poultry Family going to be speaking about her book about family business. I look forward to seeing all of you next Tuesday. Hope you all have a great, safe weekend. Remember, please wear those masks. Have a great weekend. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.